who've come here to share something very interesting called the Decoder with us. And we have Chad Evans, or Charles Evans, who's the Vice President of the US Council on Competitiveness, and Roberto, who's come all the way from Brazil to share his thoughts on what is the work. In fact, we are really looking at replicating this work as we go on to the districts in India. We will talk about it. But this is one of the most amazing tools that has actually got created and how it could actually be used to assessing what geographies are. Roberto, Chad, please. Thank you. Welcome.
I'm sorry. 15 minutes, okay.
20 minutes.
Perfect. I'm first. Amit, thank you very much. My name is Chad Evans. I'm the Executive Vice President of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness. And Amit, thanks so much for the invitation to be here today. I think you'll see some new things, Amit. You actually saw a preview of this decoder about 9 months ago when we were last together in Seoul, Korea. And we'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing since we were last together. But what we want to share with you all today, and I'm going to quickly turn to my colleague Roberto Alvarez from the Brazilian Agency for Industrial Development, is something that we call the GFCC, the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, Competitiveness Decoder. The decoder, as Amit quickly described and as mentioned on the agenda today, is really a tool for thinking. It's a tool for learning, and ultimately for folks who are interested in policy making around competitiveness issues, it's a tool for action. So Roberto, if you could take us into a description of what we're about to see today.
Okay. So, is it on? Is it working?
No.
It should do. Is it on? Is it working? Yeah. So, thanks a lot, Chad and Roberto. And as Chad said, I'm coming from Brazil. I work for something that's the Brazilian Agency for Industrial Development. And we are here today to show you something. To show you I guess it's coming. Yeah. This is just a snapshot. And we'll have a chance in a while to go through the website. This is, as Chad said, the GFCC Competitiveness Decoder. And this is a tool that has been built under the framework of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils. And before going to the system itself, I just want to go through a series of questions, or some questions that will provide you a background on the development of this tool. So the first thing is, what sparked the decoder's creation? And this was something that was done under the framework of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils. The GFCC gathers 35 members from 30 different countries today. It's in some ways still is a new organization. It was created back in 2010. Deborah Winter-Smith is the president and CEO of the GFCC, and that was the first meeting ever that we had in Washington, D.C. The second annual meeting for the GFCC was hosted in Brazil. My organization, in partnership with another Brazilian organization, are founding members of this federation. So in the second annual meeting in Brazil, members of the federation got together and kick-started an initiative to build what we call the GFCC Competitiveness Decoder. In 2012, we had a chance in the United Arab Emirates to release what is the conceptual framework behind the decoder. And then last year, as Chad said, in South Korea, in a meeting with Minister Coyne, the Minister for Finance, in Strategy in South Korea, we released the alpha version of this tool. And this is important to stress in some way. This is just the alpha. But what is the rationale behind the tool? Well, you know, you've been talking about competitiveness, but the fact is that we all have been talking about competitiveness all over the globe. But the point is that growth and development are complex phenomena. And the decoder was built to enable people to address those phenomena and to have a look at competitiveness from different angles. The fact is that humanity has together tackled issues and has taken advantage of data and technology to have a look at complex objects and to better understand complex phenomena. For instance, we have decoded the human genome. So the inspiration for the decoder is to take advantage of data and technology to better understand the complex phenomena related to growth, development, competitiveness. And well, but this is in fact a process. I told you this was initiated back in 2011. And Chad, I think that you have a few words to share with us on how we have, on the path that we've been going through together.
Thanks, Roberto. Well, as Roberto mentioned, this decoder, this tool was really built with the input of over 30 countries. But primarily it has been developed over the past 2 years by the Brazilian Agency for Industrial Development and the U.S. Council. And what we have done together is in some sense, I'm reminded now of what we just heard from Satoshi. We've been on a journey. We've actually been trying to create a story together, a story to really understand what competitiveness means, what drives competitiveness, can we visualize that, and through that visualization, can we learn lessons? And so you see this arc over the past 3 years where, and Roberto went through this with some of the pictures. I think it's important to stress here, the meetings that we've been hosting around the world over the past 3 years have been important, not just because of the socialization, but they've been important because they've actually been working sessions where we have brought together hundreds of leaders from around the world who are devoted to understanding competitiveness and who have made available to us data that had previously been unavailable. And so that's been the important part of the development of this tool that you will see soon. And I think one of the other set of issues we wanted to address, why a decoder? There are many efforts out there looking at competitiveness. Our own U.S. Council on Competitiveness has pioneered with Michael Porter a competitiveness index. The World Economic Forum has a competitiveness index. IMD has a competitiveness index. So in some sense, you might question, well, isn't the market saturated? I think our contention and what we heard from the 35 members of the Global Federation is, in fact, no. In fact, we are now at a point where we need actual hard data to really understand competitiveness, not just qualitative assessments. So the decoder is fundamentally based on that issue of hard data. It is also based upon a look at dynamic metrics, not just past-looking static metrics. The decoder has the ability to have a future perspective. I think that's also how it differentiates itself in the marketplace with other competitiveness indicators. There's a focus on drivers, and we'll talk a little bit about how we define competitiveness and the drivers that we think are critical. The decoder also has the ability for customization. So for anyone who might want to understand competitiveness, whether you're a prime minister who's just launched a major new manufacturing effort, whether you're the CEO of a company who's looking to increase your own organization's competitiveness or understand where you might want to make an investment, or if you're my mom or dad who wonders, what do I do day to day at my job? The competitiveness decoder allows for that customization and ease of use, and we'll walk through the site with everyone. And then fundamentally, the decoder is based upon a very deep philosophical agreement between 35 competitiveness organizations around the world who have together defined a common set of core principles. We call them pillars, 8 pillars that we think are critical to understanding competitiveness. Those 8 pillars are arrayed along the bottom. They may be a little difficult for you to see, but I can run through them for you. Obviously, we're looking at general economic performance. The decoder also addresses things around economic complexity, infrastructure, talent. These are all issues that have been raised today. The decoder also addresses capital issues, issues related to innovation, quality of life, and as I mentioned, importantly for the decoder, future growth areas. So all of these pillars, and these pillars, and Roberto will go through the exact metrics in just a minute, really underpin the decoder's development and its current situation. But it's also important to note that the decoder has a top-down perspective. We know that history matters, we know that institutions matter, and we know that strategy matters. And those philosophical points are also embedded in the decoder. So what is it, Roberto?
Well, the decoder, it is a tool, and it's intended to be experimented. So if you go online now to decoder.dgfcc.org, you have a chance to play with that tool. It is available on the internet. It's about data, as Chad said, and it's about hard data. We've been gathering data that comes from the statistical organizations from several countries across the globe. But more than that, data that's comparable. So, I mean the data that has been normalized by the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, and different international organizations. Comparability is a key issue for a tool like this. And once again, we've been trying to stress this over the presentation, but this is not about providing you the one best answer. It's about tooling you or tooling decision makers, business leaders, thought leaders, politicians, government officers to approach competitiveness through different lenses. So to a certain extent, it's about tooling, enabling people to master the complexity associated to competitiveness. In the end, it's expected to help countries that want to move forward in their national competitiveness agendas. And then what have we built? We put together a database organized in 8 dimensions that include 149 metrics covering 65 countries over 12 years. And this is the alpha version. We're now in the process of developing what is the beta version. We are expanding the data set. And on top of that, we built 2 different things, visualization tools and statistical tools in order to better understand patterns in terms of how countries are performing. Well, I think they're probably at this time thinking, so, but what is this thing really? So I think it's time now for us to go live and to navigate the system in order to provide you a glimpse on the features that are already implemented and the potential of the tool. So let's do that now, and I think that Chad, you will guide us in the part, right? So let's move here. Yep.
Great, thanks Roberto. So this is the snapshot of the Decoder website. It's actually live now. You could go there yourself if you want to. I think I want to point out, before we dive in, a couple of the key functions of the decoder. So you see displayed left to right across the bar here, several of those functions. One, the decoder allows you to graphically visualize data for all of these countries that Roberto mentioned. We're also able to compare countries' performance against itself and a country's performance against all the other countries who are a part of the decoder. We're also able to do that in a dynamic way and through clustering. And then ultimately, and we'll talk about this at the end of the presentation, the decoder is the beginning of what we like to think of as a global compendium of competitiveness best practices. So the vision for the decoder and for the GFCC at large is to become the go-to place, the magnet for all of those best practices that we think are critical to understanding competitiveness, ultimately for learning lessons. So I thought we would tell a little bit of a story today, given that we're in India and that our Indian colleagues released their clarion call. And as Deborah Wint-Smith, my president and CEO, mentioned this morning in the board meeting of the Competitiveness Council here, competitiveness is ultimately about productivity. How productive is a nation? And of course, this is well established not only in our own work, but that of others around the world. So Roberto has actually clicked on the first function of displaying data. And let me just point out a couple of features. On the left hand, and Roberto's going to pull down the menu, you see the 8 pillars that we've talked about, the 8 critical pillars for competitiveness. Within each of those 8 pillars, there's anywhere from 7 to 20 to 30 specific metrics that underpin that pillar. So you can actually see those displayed down the left-hand side of the column. Of course, you can also see all the countries that are involved in the decoder, and this is just an alphabetical list, and you can see displayed across from left to right the actual values, and in this case, I believe this is GDP. But let's begin to explore it a bit more. So let's stick with that productivity story, Roberto. Can you take us to India? And I'd like to do a function where we look at GDP per capita.
Yep.
Great. So we have all the data now, GDP per capita for all the countries. Let's take a specific look, however, at India through something we call time view in the upper right hand. Thanks. This is going to allow us to graphically play with the data. So we're going to choose India. And we're going to actually just play some data. We can do this in 2 ways. What Roberto has just graphed and played is the actual data, the hard data. So for every given year, you can see India's GDP per capita. Now, you can also look at it in terms of growth or an index, and you can replay that. So you see the data displayed as the baseline of 2001 up to the most current year possible. And as you hover over each year, you have the index value as well as the absolute value. So you're always able to compare and capture that. So you can begin to tell a story, obviously, about India's GDP per capita, but you're also able to customize, and the reason it's called time view is we can customize the time. So let's take a look, maybe 2007, Roberto, to 2014, or the latest data. So it recalculates based upon that. And so it just allows any user to really play with the data. And of course, you see here, just in terms of actually what you're seeing from the index, obviously, Great Recession, 2007, 8, 9, but a pretty impressive recovery in terms of growth rate for India and GDP per capita. Now, that's great to know a little bit about India, but how is India comparing against other countries? That's the second functionality of the decoder. So we're going to go back to the home page, and we're now going to really look at how does India cluster against a set of other nations on a variety of metrics. Now, when we look at this, you see the countries are clustered in this overall map by color. If you click on India, as Roberto's just done, you actually see the other countries with whom India is clustered around a set of metrics, and in this case, general economic performance. And when you hover over India, as Roberto's done, you also see in the left-hand column here 5, I believe, of the most important metrics that underpin that general economic performance for India. But we can go deeper. We can take a different perspective on the cluster, a feature we call bubbles. Now, this is exactly what you saw on the map, but a little bit more of a fun interface, and Roberto has found the Indian flag. And again, if you hover there, you get the 5 metrics again. But if you double-click on the bubble, it'll take you to a time view perspective. And the decoder automatically preloads the countries that are in that cluster. And so we could take another look at productivity. In this case, let's look at labor productivity. And you can play, again, in absolute data terms, the labor productivity values for that cluster. Now, you see at the far right, India is a little bit down in terms of its overall labor productivity compared with the rest of its cluster. We can take a different perspective and look at the index. It's a very different story, of course. India's growth rate in terms of its labor productivity is much higher and is outperforming the rest of the cluster. So that's a very different way of looking at this. Now, the cluster is big. There are a lot of countries. There are a lot of colors. It's a little bit difficult to actually maybe tease out some values. So one of the things that we can do, and Roberto is actually doing that now, is you can deselect countries from the cluster. So you can begin to really customize who do you really want to compare India to. And I think what we're going to try to do is perhaps show a story around the BRICS. So you can either deselect countries, or we could probably just type in BRICS, because what the decoder also does, it has pre-loaded a set of regions and areas that are commonly examined in the literature. So we're playing the labor productivity story from an index perspective, looking just at the BRICS nations. Now, I guess the story here is, of course, fairly impressive growth since 2008, 2009 for India compared to most of the BRICS. China, again, at over, I think, nearly 230% growth over that roughly 10-year period. I can't really see from this close up. But India, I think, is growing around 85% over that period. So again, this is also reflecting some of what you saw in the clarion call that Amit and the team released earlier today. So we've told a little story about how India is performing in terms of its productivity. But I think the next question that automatically arises from this is, so what? What do you do about that? What can the decoder tell any policymaker if you wanted to change India's performance? So Roberto, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk a little bit about the third function of the decoder and where users can take it and to explore more deeply.
Okay, so one of the things that you've been stressing here in the council, and that's included in your clarion call, the infographics that was recently released, it's about talent. And we all know that people, or the talent pool, is a key issue all across the globe for competitiveness. We could try to use one of the features that it is the compare feature to better explore that. So what is the compare feature? What have we done? How are we comparing? We have found the function, the line, the vector that best describes the whole data set. And we have taken each one of the countries and project each one of those countries into that line. So we are not creating or weighting arbitrarily that. We're just, it's the data set that is telling us the relative position of countries. So this is the kind of thing that we can do, and we can explore any one of the 8 dimensions, and we can go, for instance, to the dimension related to talent. And we will see, what we will see here, and I hope that you can see in some way, is that in that case, India is ranked in the 42nd position. But there are different aspects related to talent. One of the aspects, and this is the idea of the compare feature, is to allow the user to play with that. So we can change the weights related to different aspects related to talent. For instance, one of the things that we know, and we know because of data, is that size matters. So let's imagine that someone is really stressing the development of the talent pool, emphasizing the size of the talent pool. So we could increase the weight for the size of the talent pool. And what happens? India has jumped to the 2nd position. This is not, but this is to tell, hey, demographics is playing in favor of India, for sure. But maybe, and for countries like mine, for Brazil, there are concerns in terms of the quality of the talent pool. So let's imagine that Brazil or any country wants to benchmark itself in relation to the quality of the talent pool. So let's put more weight on that, and let's see how positions are changed, because we want to put more emphasis on that. So let's chat, for instance, put more weight on what, let's say, the scores in the PISA test, yeah, which is an internationally compared and standardized examination or test. What happens then? The position for India has dropped. India has dropped in the ranking from the 2nd to the 5th, 3rd. What is the story that's being told here? What's being told is that there are countries that are performing better when someone is putting more emphasis in that, in the PISA test. So this is countries that in some way could be, we all could have a look at in order to understand what they're doing. And this brings us to, let's say, to the 5th feature that we have implemented, that is about best practices. This is an initiative that is being really, it's in its beginning stage, but the GFCC since 2011 has been decoding, systematizing information on best practices to promote competitiveness. The feature that we have implemented in Decoder is just a seed of the thing that we're building at this moment, but you can go online, for instance, and check best practice in terms of developing the talent pool. Well, as we said, this is the alpha version. We are in the process of developing new features and new stuff. So I think that the idea was just to provide you a glimpse of the system, and we could maybe go back to the presentation now, just to sum up. And so, summing up, there are different aspects related to this tool, and I want to call your attention for 3 of those aspects. First, this is about data. clusters were not the input, but the output. We took advantage of statistical tools to define clusters. And we are using data that's comparable, internationally comparable. And in terms of making comparisons, this is the second thing that I want to call your attention. Because in some way you have tried to address the questions like this. Is it fair to compare Uruguay and India, Luxembourg and the United States? So we took advantage of those statistical tools to build in some way fair comparisons. And third, in the end, this is about improving people, allowing people to explore competitiveness through different angles. It's not about providing you the one best solution. This is a complex reality. It's about empowering the user to address the issue through different angles. Is that enough? We don't think so. And there are three things that we are working at this moment that I want to share information with you. Well, the first thing is about the data set. We are expanding the data set, but it's something that we haven't told you is that beyond expanding the current data set, we're building a new one. We have already imported the whole UNCTAD trade data set, and we are building upon that, and we are building new features taking advantage of the two data sets. But this is not enough in some way just building data or expanding the data set and building new features. I think that it's also about dialogue, and I think that Chad, you have something to add on that in order for us to.
Well, I think I'm just going to, thanks Roberto, just really to wrap, I mean, this is part of the dialogue. Part of our process at the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, and Amit, we thank you for this opportunity, is to begin to share this tool with others and to receive feedback. I know we probably won't have time for Q&A now, but Roberto and I are here for the rest of the day and evening, would be happy to discuss with you. One of the commitments the U.S. Council is making is to begin to use this global tool domestically. As we begin to ramp up for our 2016 election cycle, we will be looking for 2015 as a year of sharing and discovery, and in some sense promoting the competitiveness agenda across the United States. We are in fact learning from the Brazilian experience. Roberto and his team has just led a very similar exercise in advance of, I believe, next week's election, presidential election in Brazil. So this is also reflective of what's important about the Global Federation, that is mutual learning, mutual support, and I think we're beginning, and Amit gave a prelude to this when he introduced us. There's a great opportunity with India given the deep data sets, not only nationally, but within regions of India. So we will be looking towards, as we build towards the beta version of this site, to begin to incorporate regional data, local data. So that's the long-term goal for the Decoder, and we thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. Appreciate it.
Roberto, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.